All right, I just want to spend a little bit of time providing some context for the Gospels, for the incarnation of Jesus Christ, the fullness of time of which Paul speaks, in which the Son was born. And I think it would be a good idea to discuss a little bit about the world of early Judaism or primitive Judaism during the Second Temple period, or the period once the temple upon the Jews' return from Babylon, the temple that was built then, and from then on unto the time of the birth of Christ. Just a couple of basic historical moments we should go over. Okay, the children of Israel have returned from Babylon, and I should say more specifically that it is the children of Judah, the tribe of Judah, which have returned from Babylon, and there are already Israelites from what used to be the northern kingdom. They have returned to the northern territories, Galilee and Samaria, but the children of Israel have returned, and they've returned very changed. They have come back having repented of their idolatrous ways, and there is a newfound commitment to monotheism, a newfound commitment to hear, O Israel, Shema, O Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, the Shema. There is the onset of several different groups that are trying to purify Israel, following in the footsteps of Ezra. One of those groups is going to be the people of Zadok. Zadok is a high priest and of the tribe of Levi, and Zadok, his followers are going to be called Zadokites, and later on that term Zadokites becomes our word for Sadducees. The Sadducees are trying to purify the priesthood, and the Sadducees tend to only rely upon the authority of the 5 books of Moses, and they want to bring Israel back to the 5 books of Moses. They have some difficulty with the prophets, just like the Samaritans. They have difficulty with the prophets because there were many false prophets also, and some false prophets who created writings. And so the Sadducees essentially threw the baby out with the bathwater, as we say. They essentially got rid of all the non-Mosaic prophets out of their canon. There's another group, the group of what we call the separatists, what we would call the separatists. The word Pharisee seems to mean separate, and there's a group of Pharisees. They're typically working class people, but there's a focus upon knowing the Torah and knowing the prophets. And there's a belief in the resurrection and the dead, especially based upon the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel chapter 12 is very explicit about a resurrection of the body, a resurrection from the dead. And the Pharisees want to purify all of Israel's ancient religion and go back to its foundations in the Torah. And so every area of life for the Pharisees, the separatists, is regulated by Torah. We also have the Essenes, and I'm going to allude to them a little bit later on. The Essenes are also a kind of a separatist group. They gather around the Dead Sea area in the wilderness. They have separated themselves from the people of Jerusalem, and specifically the priesthood, which they believe has been corrupted by several influences, specifically by Gentile influence. So you will have the Hasmonean rulers in the 100s and the 1st and 2nd centuries BC. They're in charge of the temple services, and the Essenes believe that they are not legitimate, that they were actually a priesthood that comes from an inferior branch of the Levitical tribe, and so they separate themselves from the temple. They don't emphasize the temple anymore. they emphasize the wilderness and the land of Israel. All right, and they go out into the wilderness, and as I'll explain later, there's a messianic reason for their gathering in the wilderness. They believe that that is where the Messiah is prophesied he will first appear, is in the wilderness. All right, and we also have the Zealots. The Zealots, Jesus is going to have one zealot at least among his disciples. The Zealots are a people they're a political movement, and they're wanting to get rid of Roman influence, get rid of Roman politicians, and so they're trying to stir up an army, really, to rise up against Rome and become independent. We all realize that there's also going to be a Christian sect of Judaism that rises up. Christianity begins as a Jewish movement. It's Jewish at its core. And at one time, the only Christians there were on earth were Jews. But over time, as we're going to see, there's going to be a separation of the two, specifically a separation. The two closest Jewish groups were the Pharisees and the Christians. They are closely aligned. If you read Luke's Gospel and Luke's Acts, you'll find out that the Pharisees are often sympathetic to the Christian movement. And there's even a little bit of this in John's Gospel in John chapter 3, where we have Jesus meeting Nicodemus, who's a Pharisee. All through Luke and Acts, there's a great deal of sympathy for the Pharisees because they're most closely aligned with Christian beliefs. They believe in a coming Messiah. They believe in a resurrection of the dead. They believe in the supremacy of Scripture. However, that antagonism will be evident, especially in Matthew and in Mark's Gospel, and then later on in John's Gospel. The two closest cousins, really, are going to become the fiercest of enemies. But we should step back a little bit farther in time from the first century and just take a look back a little bit at some of the developments in the ancient world that have led to the kind of world that we see apparent in the Gospels. I should mention, I think it would be good to discuss for just a moment Alexander the Great's influence upon the shape of the world, especially in the time of Christ. Alexander is the son of Philip of Macedon. Macedonia is northern Greece. It's up in the mountains. There weren't one group of Greeks in the world. There were many, many groups of Greeks. The Greek label was a very broad label for a broad group of people. There could even be a heavy Greek influence in what is modern-day Turkey and what was called Ionia at one time. Greek was not really an ethnicity at the time. Greek was more of a basic cultural commonality and place in the Mediterranean world. So you would have Greeks, again, over in Ionia, on the eastern shores, northeastern shores of the Mediterranean. You would also have Greeks in the northern part, in Macedonia. You would have Greeks in the southern part, near the shores of the Mediterranean, in Attica, in Athens. And you would have also a great many Greek colonies in what is today Italy. All right, so Greek was really a kind of a shared culture. It wasn't so much a single ethnicity as we think of Greek today. All right, so the Macedonians were a kind of a mountain Greek. They spoke almost a different language from the Greeks of the Greek of the Athenians. The Macedonians were considered to be what we in the United States would call rednecks. They spoke with a heavy drawl. They spoke a dialect that was very different from the very polished and sophisticated Greek of Plato and Socrates. They were made fun of by the Athenians for being so backward, such a backward group of people who spoke such an ugly form of Greek. Well, it so happened that Philip of Macedon was a great warrior. and he had some new ideas in the history of warfare. He created, it seems, the idea of the phalanx. This became an effective tool in Alexander, his son's armament. The phalanx is a group of soldiers standing side by side with one another, and then 18 ranks of soldiers standing behind the front row. And each rank of soldier holds a great big 12-foot pike. In the back of the phalanx, you have the soldiers holding their pike up high. It has a dagger on the end. And they have a shield here in their left hand, and their shield covers their left shoulder and the right half of the person standing next to them. So here they stand. They march in the back row, pike standing upright, right, and the shield in their left hand. The next row up has the same suit of armor. They have the same pike and they have the shield, but they hold their pike at an angle over the shoulder a little bit of the man, the rank standing in front of them. And so you have the back rank pikes upward, and the next rank, the pikes at a slight angle. And all of the ranks forward, they hold their pikes at a lower and lower and lower angle until you get to the front row, and the pikes are held out straight. All right, and they march in this fashion. The reason why the back rank holds their pikes up so high, and everyone in descending order, is to hide behind the phalanx. You have the cavalry. They're hidden. And so Alexander's father, Philip, figured that he could get other armies to miscalculate based on the fact that they didn't see any cavalry, and the cavalry would be hidden by the phalanx. And so the opposing army would expose themselves, would commit themselves to one way or another, and then out would come the cavalry and outflank them. And Alexander's father took this to the bounds of Macedonia, took complete control of the mountainous region of what is today Greek Macedonia, and even conquered all the way down to Athens. And the Athenians groaned and moaned over the fact that the rednecks had conquered. They spoke a form of Greek, the Macedonians did, called Koine Greek. Again, the Athenians thought it was rough and tumble and horrible Greek, but nevertheless, that's the Greek they spoke. Pretty soon, they do garner some of the respect of the Greek world, especially by conquering Athens. And Philip has a son named Alexander through his wife Olympia. And Philip hires Aristotle, the great successor to Plato and Socrates, to tutor his son Alexander. And Alexander wants to be a conqueror of the world. His favorite hero is Achilles. He goes to sleep every night, it is said, with a copy of the Iliad underneath his pillow. He dreams of being Achilles. He's taught by Aristotle. He wants to spread Greek culture, specifically Macedonian culture, which was called Hellenos, the culture of Helen, all throughout the world. Well, Alexander was only one of the sons of Philip. So how was it going to be that he would be the successor? Well, Olympia arranged for Philip to be killed. She killed her own husband while he was sitting in a theater, much as Abraham Lincoln was killed in a theater while watching a play, My American Cousin. Philip of Macedon is assassinated by his own wife. His wife sent a servant, and the reason was because Philip had just taken a concubine and had another son, and he appeared to be favoring that other son, and so in order to protect her own son, she had her husband killed, and of course Alexander assumes the throne of Macedon. Alexander takes his training from Aristotle and his training from reading the Iliad, and he sets out east. After he's conquered all of what is today modern-day Greece and beyond, and even Turkey, he sets out towards India. He makes it all the way to the Ganges River. He conquers as he goes. He conquers the Middle East. He conquers even Israel. And He sets up cities everywhere he goes. Some of them are named after him. One of his great cities is Alexandria, Egypt. He dies at around 33 years old, the same age as Jesus. 33, the early 30s seems to be an age in which many, many great heroes have died. But Alexander the Great dies at 33, probably from too much eating, too much drinking, too much partying, etc. And he hands off, since he doesn't have any children yet, he hands off his seat of power and divides it among 4 of his best generals. And there's the general Seleucus. Seleucus is going to control what is today modern Antioch. And you're going to have his general Ptolemy, who's going to control Egypt, and the Ptolemies are going to be in control of Egypt for a few hundred years. Cleopatra is a Ptolemaic queen. And you're going to have a couple of other generals controlling other areas. Seleucus and his successors are going to control Israel. All right, and it's going to be a successor of Seleucus. His name is Antiochus Epiphanes, who's going to be the one who sets up what is called the abomination of desolation. He's going to set up a graven, an idol in the temple, and he's going to have on the altar of the Lord, he's going to have a pig slaughtered, and he's going to force the children of Israel, the Jews, to worship at this altar and worship before the abomination of desolation, and Israel refuses under the aegis of the Maccabees, the famous Maccabees. Judah Maccabees is going to rise up and lead a revolt. Well, all of this is important because the spread of Alexander the Great's language is going to be of central importance to the formation of the New Testament and really the New Testament world. Before Alexander the Great's time, language was a problem, a major problem for travel. There was an early form of what we might call lingua franca. The Babylonians spoke, as well as the Assyrians and the Syrians, spoke a basic form of Aramaic, but it was very limited to the eastern half of the Mediterranean. In ancient Italy, the people are going to speak Latin, an early form of Latin and Etruscan. Everywhere you go, different languages, language barriers are a problem. There's not much travel that can be done because of language barriers. Wherever there are language barriers, there are going to be cultural barriers. Language and culture go hand in hand, and if you don't speak somebody's language, you're going to have a difficult time sharing with them culturally. And so oftentimes the world is kind of at war with one another over cultural differences. Culture sets us apart. So, with the spread of Alexander's Koine Greek, though, he conquers places in Italy. He conquers places all the way, again, as I said, over into India. And everywhere he goes, he spreads what's called Hellenism. That is the Greek culture. Greek forms, the worship of Greek deities, and Greek artistic form, Greek mythology, and most importantly, Greek language. And so really for the first time in human history since, at least the Tower of Babylon, the Tower of Babel, you have a common language across all of the known world of the Mediterranean, stretching all the way over to India. You can speak, you can understand. A person over in the western part of India can understand somebody from Italy. Okay, so it's possible for the first time since Babel for a human being to travel thousands and thousands and thousands of miles and communicate with all of the local people, because they would then speak that lingua franca, the Koine Greek. This allows for the spread of merchandise, commerce can develop, ship travel is now possible from both sides of the Mediterranean. Highways are built so that merchants can travel from place to place, because people, again, they can communicate with each other. And so the world becomes much, much smaller by the time we get to the first century, the century of Christ. The world, it's possible really for the first time in human history for people to travel anywhere in the world and be able to make a living. So, this is important because the New Testament is written not in Hebrew. The New Testament is not written in Aramaic. In fact, there are only a couple of Aramaic words in the whole New Testament, like Paul's word, Maranatha, Lord come, and Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? Or Ephphatha, be open, or Talitha cumai, which means damsel, arise. Only a couple of Aramaisms in all of the New Testament. Outside of that, it is written in Greek, Koine Greek, the Greek that is known by everyone across the world. Okay, so it's the spread of Hellenism that allows for the Apostle Paul to travel everywhere across the world and be able to preach the gospel. He would preach the gospel oftentimes in Greek. I would imagine he was able to speak in Latin to some degree, and he was certainly able to speak in Aramaic or in Hebrew, but Greek, he was able to speak in one language and be understood both in the Sanhedrin and also be understood in the Areopagus in Athens or in Rome itself. The apostles could go out and preach the gospel and be absolutely understood. Without this accessibility of language, without this lingua franca, it's not possible for the world to be evangelized in the way the world was evangelized. Very, very important. Now, most religions in human history happen to be provincial religions. That is, religions that are part and parcel of a particular culture, and they're rooted in a certain language, and outside of that language, outside of that place and time, they're not very evangelistic, they're not very accessible to outsiders. In fact, religions tended to be determined by culture and by language. Okay, so you had the Jews. Their culture, their language determined the spread of their teachings. Ancient Judaism, as long as it just continued to speak Hebrew or Aramaic, it was not in an evangelistic religion. Ancient Greek, even ancient Greek religious forms were not very evangelistic. You didn't have evangelists going out and declaring, here's the new God. Here's the God you need to worship. That didn't happen all that often until you have the spread of Hellenism where language is shared. All right? And so I should make one other note. Today, you have, say, the religion of Islam, and it's very much rooted in Arabic. In spite of the fact that Islam is a world religion and it's practiced all over the world, still, if you speak to a Muslim scholar, the Muslim scholar is going to tell you that the only way to truly understand the Quran is to know Arabic. All right? The Arabic translation is the supreme translation. Everything else is a diminishment from that, a decline from that. You don't really know. The reason why people are confused, they would say, about the Quran is because they don't know Arabic. Well, that's very, very different from Christianity. Very different from Christianity. Christianity was, from its outset, an evangelistic religion. The words of Christ as he ascended into heaven are, go into all the world, preach the gospel. On the day of Pentecost, people are going to speak with other tongues. There is the evangelistic, missionary impetus in Christianity right from the very outset of the Christian faith. So really, really important difference. But again, I want to take you back to the spread of Hellenism, which enabled the Christian evangelist to speak in every place of the world and be understood. Okay, one final note along these lines. It's important to note that the New Testament, as I mentioned, is all written in Koine Greek. All right, and I do think it would be a good idea, and I'm going to make this point later on. I think it would be a really good idea to know Greek, to know the ancient Greek. If you can take some time to study the Greek, all kinds of new opportunities are going to open. Not new doctrines, no new doctrines, because the Christian faith is extremely translatable. In fact, as I mentioned a minute ago, the point of Christian doctrine is to be translatable. It's not provincial. It's not confined to one particular tongue. And so you don't have any kind of preeminence in terms of doctrine if you only know, if you know Greek or if you know Hebrew. The person who only knows English or the person who only knows French and doesn't know any of those ancient languages is not second place to somebody who knows Greek and Hebrew. The Bible, the Christian Bible, is extraordinarily translatable, relatable in every tongue and language. But anyway, please understand that religion was not always understood that way. Again, a particular ethnicity would have their own faith. Whenever you traveled into their own lands, you did as they did, you worshiped as they worshiped, you practiced as they practiced, you spoke as they spoke. And if not, you couldn't be a part of that culture at all. The gods of the ancient world were very provincial. When you would cross over a certain territory, it was believed that you were crossing into the territory of a different god. Okay, so if an individual from Macedonia went over to Persia, you would have to pay respects to the god of Persia or the gods of Persia, and vice versa. Sometimes these gods were supposedly at war with one another, and that's sort of what you see a little bit in Homer's Iliad and Odyssey to some degree. But the Christian faith comes, and taking its roots from Judaism, it understands that this territorialism is a human construct. It's a projection of human ignorance onto the screen of history. And it has no place in the world. That the Yahweh is Lord of heaven and earth. And everywhere you go in the world, there's only one God, only one Lord, one faith, and as Paul teaches, one baptism. Okay, now I want to say a few words now about the hinge figure in Christian history, specifically John the Baptist. I'm going to revisit him at several other points as we proceed through the Gospels. But I do want to make note of a few things. This very important figure who heralds the coming of the Messiah. There are many, many prophecies of the Messiah. The people are looking for a Messiah. They're waiting for a Messiah. Israel has always been this small sliver of a nation caught between the tides of mighty empires, and always seems to be at the mercy of whichever power comes next. Okay, I should have mentioned a little while ago that Alexander the Great's generals, particularly Seleucus and Ptolemy, they could not hold on to their rule in ancient Israel because the Romans were a rising power at the same time, and pretty soon they conquered the Greeks, and then they conquered the Middle East as well. And so by the time we get to the time of Christ, we're going to have Roman rule, not Greek rule, but there are still Greek forms. The Romans themselves are kind of, in a way, they themselves are kind of conquered by the Greeks. That is, they begin to speak Koine Greek as well. Nevertheless, Israel has been caught between all of these mighty empires, nation after nation, always the servant of all of these other nations. And there's hope that one day a Messiah will come and that he will allow Israel to be independent and to worship freely in the way that it has been taught to worship. And that is the hope of the Jewish people. Freedom for the Jewish people is not freedom to do whatever you want. Freedom is not about what you get to do or don't get to do. It's about being able to worship the way that you want, about being able to worship according to the teachings of Moses and the prophets. Well, of course, they are the servants of one nation after another. But there are prophetic texts that tell of a coming Messiah. But these can be very difficult to pinpoint. For instance, one text says that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem, the city of David. Now, the city of David itself is a little bit confusing. There's a little bit of ambiguity. Is that Bethlehem where David was born? Or is that Jerusalem where he ruled? Okay, so even in that one prophecy, there is some ambiguity. All right. There's the prophecy that the Messiah would be called branch or Nazar, a Nazarene. All right, so would he be from Nazareth or would he be from Bethlehem? But it also says, there's a prophecy that says he would be king of Jerusalem. He would be a child of Jerusalem. So is he from Nazareth? Is he from Bethlehem? Is he from Jerusalem? There's also a prophecy about my son being called out of Egypt. Now this seems to be only in reference to Israel's exodus from Egypt, but it was taken as a messianic text that my son, which is lingo in the Old Testament for the Messiah. Okay, Psalm chapter 2, the son that's referred to is the coming Messiah. Okay, my son have I called out of Egypt. So is he going to be from Nazareth, Bethlehem, Jerusalem, or is he going to be from Egypt? There's also another prophecy that a light would arise out of Galilee, the land of Zebulun. So is he going to be from Galilee, from Nazareth, from Bethlehem, from Jerusalem, from Egypt? Which is it? See, prophecy can be very difficult to look at while it's in the future. Very, very difficult to read. And that's one of the occupational hazards of being somebody who's always trying to pinpoint every prophetic text. We get into these kinds of dangers when we start dealing with the book of Revelation. Okay, we are always identifying this particular symbol with this particular event in the world, or a coming event, or this particular symbol with a different country somewhere in the world, or a different power. And again, prophetic text can be very, very, very difficult to read that way. Look at the prophecies concerning the Messiah. Just this one prophecy regarding where he's from. It's very difficult. One more way of looking at this. Is he going to be a suffering servant, as Isaiah chapter 53 suggests? Is he going to be somebody who is killed by his own people? They will look upon me whom they have pierced. Okay, I am surrounded by dogs. They have driven spikes into my hands and feet. Okay, my God, why have you forsaken me? There are these cries of dereliction. There are these hints that the Messiah is going to suffer, but the greater majority of the prophecies regarding the Messiah say that the Messiah is going to be the conquering one, and that he's going to live forever and ever and reign forever, and of his kingdom there's never going to be an end. Okay, that's just politically. Is he going to be a martyr for some cause, or is he going to be somebody who is a conqueror? Is he going to be from Bethlehem, or is he going to be from Nazareth or Egypt? Okay, and then a third aspect of this. Is he just a man? Is he just a man, or is he a God-man? Is he God manifest in the flesh? There are different texts that seem to suggest that he's going to be a man, and other texts that suggest he's going to be God. And then some texts seem to suggest that he's both. The Son of Man, the one who comes on the clouds of glory. Okay? And then there's the famous Psalm text. My Lord said unto my Lord, sit thou at my right hand. Now this is David speaking, Psalm 110. If this is just David speaking of his human successor, his child, why is David calling his own child my Lord? A father doesn't call his son Lord. And it can't just be this Yahweh figure, because you have two references to a Lord. My Lord said unto my Lord. So there's this interesting prophetic text here regarding the identity of the Messiah. Is he somehow God himself? All right? So you have, once again, confusion on the question of where he's going to be from. Confusion on the question of whether he's going to be a martyr or a conqueror. And confusion on the question of what is going to be his identity. Is he going to be God? Or is he going to be man? Is he going to be both? Is he going to be an angel? The Essenes believed that he was going to be an angel. The Qumran sect, if you read their text, you're going to find out that there was a belief that the coming Messiah was going to be an angel, and it was going to be Michael. Okay, so is he going to be an angel? Is he going to be a man? Is he going to be God? Is he going to be God-man? All right, so just in these three basic categories, there's all kinds of ambiguity, there's a lack of understanding, and there are different schools of thought. And they argue with one another. They debate with one another. No, he's going to come from Nazareth. And the other side says, no, he's going to come from Bethlehem. All kinds of confusion. Who could have possibly guessed that there would be one person who could fulfill all of these? He would be indeed born in Bethlehem, but he would be brought up for a while in Egypt and called out of Egypt, and then he would be raised in Nazareth. But he would set up his ministry central in Galilee, and then he would rule from his throne on the cross in Jerusalem, and then in heaven. I left out that particular origin as well. There was also thought that the Messiah would come from heaven. He did that as well. And then Jesus would be both a martyr, crucified, pierced by his own people, but also a conquering warrior. For look at how many people have, from every nation, bowed their knee to Jesus Christ. Now it was prophesied that a son of David, one of the kings of David, was going to be the ultimate ruler, and that he was going to break all of the enemies of Israel. And they would all one day worship this Jewish king. None of the sons of David have ever fulfilled that prophecy, ever even come close. Never. Okay? In fact, the dynasty, the Davidic dynasty, petered out with Zerubbabel, which means born in Babylon, which is kind of an insult. That's the end of the Davidic dynasty. And most of the Davidic kings were evil, wicked men like Manasseh, who killed children, offered them on altars to Moloch. Well, how could these Davidic kings possibly have ever fulfilled this prophecy to rule over the nations? It never happened during the Davidic dynasty. Solomon came closest, but he actually, relative to the empires of Persia, the empire of Syria, the empire of Babylon, the empire of Rome, the empire of Greece, Solomon never even came close to ruling at that level. Only with Christ, Jesus Christ, could it be said that all of the nations of the earth have finally bowed their knee to a Jewish king, and that is to Jesus of Nazareth. Now, John the Baptist is a prophetic figure who heralds in this particular figure. Now, according to Deuteronomy chapter 8 and verse 15, Moses the prophet prophesied, "The Lord thy God will raise up unto thee a prophet," capital P, "from the midst of thee, of thy brethren, like unto me. Unto him ye shall hearken." All right? So Moses himself is saying that there's going to be a raising up of another prophet. All right? Listen to him. Capital P. Elijah was believed to be that prophet. All right, and he is the storyteller in 1st and 2nd Kings. Tell the story along that Mosaic model. Remember, Moses had these prophetic powers, and his job was to go and declare the Lord God to the children of Israel. That's what Elijah's job was. Moses fled into the wilderness because he was afraid of Pharaoh, a king. Elijah fled into the wilderness because he was afraid of Jezebel. Moses went to the top of Mount Sinai and saw a theophany. And according to the book of Deuteronomy, the name Sinai is actually Horeb. Okay? Elijah goes into the wilderness and goes to the top of Mount Horeb, and he sees a theophany. Okay? Moses, the burning bush, and then later on he's going to see the Lord pass by. And Elijah is also going to stand on top of the mountain. He's going to be declared the word of the Lord, what to do, and the Lord passes by, but his presence is in the still small voice. Moses leads the children of Israel around, but the people are often dissatisfied with him. Elijah is often drawing the ire of the people of Israel, especially Ahab and Jezebel. Moses goes to the top of Mount Nebo and looks into Canaan land, and he dies. Never entering into the promised land, he dies on the other side of Jordan, on top of Mount Nebo. Okay? Where does Elijah? He doesn't die, but where does he end, or where does he cease to be here on this earth? Well, if you follow early 2 Kings, there's this interesting episode where Elisha he knows his mentor is about to die, so he wants to follow him wherever he goes, and Elijah is essentially trying to shake him. He wants to go off alone. Something big and important is about to happen, and he wants it to happen alone. So he's on one side of the Jordan. He says, I'm going over to the other side of the Jordan. Stay here until I get back. And Elisha says, oh no, I know something great's about to happen. So he follows him. And then Elijah does the same thing on the other side. Stay here on this side. I'm going to go over to the other side. I'll be back. And Elisha says, no, I'm going to follow you all the way to the end. Well, by the time this whole scenario is done, Elijah actually is on the other side of Jordan, not in the promised land, when the chariots of fire come to pick him up and take him away. And then they cry out, my father, the chariots of Israel and the horses thereof. That's the end of Elijah. He ceases to exist here in this world on the other side, or the wrong side of Jordan. He, like Moses, doesn't cease to exist here in the promised land. It's on the other side of Jordan. Okay? Moses has a successor named Joshua, a younger man, who leads the children of Israel into great victory in the promised land. Elijah has a successor named Elisha. It's very similar to the name Joshua. Okay, he has Elisha. And Elisha performs twice the miracles that Elijah performed, just as Joshua actually conquers the land of Canaan, unlike Moses, who never got to see the land, or never got to enter into the land. All right, he leaves the mantle. Moses hands over his mantle to Joshua. Elijah hands over his mantle to Elisha. All right? Now, if you think that's the end of the parallels, it's not even close. Because when we come to the book of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we get this figure of John the Baptist. And as I'm going to talk about later on, he looks like Elijah. He carries the mantle of Elijah, which is just a camel's hair mantle. And his life strikingly resembles the life of Elijah and Moses. And he's believed to be the great prophet, Elijah and Moses, the second coming of Elijah and Moses. Okay, so let's look at these parallels again in light of John the Baptist. Remember, there's this a prophet who confronts kings. Moses confronted Pharaoh. Elijah confronted Ahab and Jezebel, and Elijah will confront Herod and his wife Herodias. All right? Moses flees into Egypt, into the wilderness. Elijah into the wilderness as well from Jezebel. And John the Baptist is going to preach in the desert away from the powers that be. Okay? Elisha is the successor of Elijah, Joshua the successor of Moses, and Yahshua, Jesus, is the successor of John the Baptist. Okay? So all three of them have these successors, and they're all they have similar sounding names: Joshua, Elisha, and Joshua, Jesus. Interestingly, we're going to find out that John the Baptist is going to cease to be, and interestingly, he's going to be killed, martyred, on the other side of the Jordan. Now, this is not recorded in the Gospels where John the Baptist dies. We're just told that he died where Herod was keeping him. But according to Josephus, a Jewish historian of the first century, later contemporary of Paul and John, greatly admired the figure of John the Baptist. And John the Baptist, according to Josephus, was killed in Herod's winter home in Macharea, which is on the other side of the Jordan River, not in the Promised Land. Okay, so the lives of Moses, Elijah, and John the Baptist are almost exactly parallel, and they serve the same function in many ways, but there's a crescendo leading higher and higher. At last, John the Baptist hands over his mantle to Jesus. He says in John chapter 3, when somebody approaches John the Baptist and wonders if he's getting envious and jealous about Jesus' followers growing more and more and John the Baptist's followers decreasing, John the Baptist says, I'm the friend of the bridegroom, and the friend rejoices at the voice of the bridegroom. He must increase, I must decrease. All right, this is very much a Moses and Joshua exchange, as well as an Elijah and Elisha exchange, and now John the Baptist and Jesus exchange. All right, in the coming lectures, we're going to go into each gospel: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We'll spend several lectures on each of the gospels, discussing different themes in the gospels, and then we'll also have a follow-up lecture on the life of Christ in specifically the book of Hebrews and in the book of Revelation. We'll have that discussion. All in all, always, we're going to learn how Jesus is Lord in the early Christian confession and in our own.